Good morning, Good morning, everyone. We're starting at Perek Chaf Gimel, chapter 23 of Sefer Yeshayahu. Now, we have had for the last 10 prakim a series of prophecies that have been characterized as masaot, as prophecies which were burdensome. They were among the more difficult of prophecies that were out there. And in the course of these prakim, most of those prophecies dealt with the non-Jews. There was a series, the last couple we had, were talking about the Jewish people. And this is the last one here in Perek Chaf Gimel. Perek Chaf Gimel, we're going to be dealing with the cities of Tyre, of Tzor, the city of Sidon, and also the city of Tarshish. Now, the city of Tarshish was we don't know where it was, by the way. It may have been in Tunisia. It may have been Carthage in Tunisia. It may have been on the Iberian Peninsula in southwestern Spain. It may have been an area around Turkey. We're really not sure where Tarshish was. We do encounter Tarshish, if you remember, with Yonah as well. He went towards Tarshish. But we do know one thing about Tarshish, and we know one thing about Sidon that's important for this. And that is that the city of Tzor, the city of Tyre, which is in Lebanon today, the city of Tyre was a city that was an international center of commerce. And so on the map that I shared with those who are in person today, and I apologize for those who are online, this map comes both from the Dat Mikra and also from this wonderful atlas, which is the Atlas Dat Mikra. This map just identifies, for example, on it, all of the different produce that came towards Tyre. And you just look from the south, if you look all the way in Egypt, you have shayish, you have marble. You have Bosem and Evan Yekarav Zahav coming from south area, for example, from Arabia. You have slaves who are coming from the north. You have all different kinds of produce that are all coming, and I'm just holding it up right to the camera so you can see it, all different produce that was coming, and it was centered on the city of Tzor and the city of Tyre. Now, the city of Tyre, and on the other side of the page, there's an article from the Atlas Eitz Chaim describing it. The city of Tyre was actually a fascinating city because originally it was an island. It was on an island that was separated somewhere, and there's a disagreement, somewhere between 1.5 kilometers to a little bit more than 0.5 kilometer off of the coast. And until the time of Alexander the Great, it remained an island. Alexander the Great succeeded in building a connection by bringing tremendous amounts of earth and filling in the ocean for that distance and bringing it and ultimately conquering Tyre. Until that point, Tyre always thought that it was above, any type of conquest. So we're talking until about the 4th century BCE that Tyre was pretty safe because it was an island. There was also a sister city at the coast. So you had both of these pieces as well. Now, Tyre on this map is right here on the coast. You see the word Tzor. It's a little bold. Oh, Tzor is Tyre. Okay. That connection is still maintained. So if you see Tyre today, it's a coastal city, but it's not an island city. Okay. Now, in terms of some more background on Tzor, what we'll also see in this perek is that Tzor, in this, we're talking about the downfall of Tzor, we're also going to be mentioning a lot of other nations. So there's Tzor, and there's Kittim, and there's Sidon, and there's Mitzrayim, and there's Tarshish, and there's Canaan, and there's Kasdim, and there's Ashur. By the mere fact that we're mentioning all of these other nations as part of the prophecy of the downfall of Tyre, Professor Yair Hoffman suggests that this is just there to emphasize the international nature of the city of Tyre. That's a little bit. Again, in terms of Tarshish, I had mentioned Tarshish, there's 4 or more different theories of where it is. The Targum Yonatan says it's North Africa. The Abarbanel says that it's actually not just plain North Africa, but it's actually Tunis, which is Tunisia, which was in those days Carthage. The Malbim says it's Tarsisus, which was, again, that southwestern space on the Iberian Peninsula, what we would call Spain, on the other side of the Mediterranean. Rashi says it's just a general term, not for a place, but it's a general term for the entire Mediterranean. Tarshish was the city, was one of the ways of expressing it. That's a little bit of background in terms of geography. In terms of the parak itself is a lament. It's a kinah, and it's a kinah in 4 parts. It's a kinah in 3 parts. The first part is about the destruction of Tzor. And that destruction of Tzor, we'll talk about the boats of Tarshish, the great methods with which they had to transport all of the goods, both back and forth, the commerce. Ultimately, we'll say that the boats of Tarshish are going to have no place to land. There's not going to be a port available for them. It talks about the Yoshvei, the residents of the island. One of the explanations of that island are actually, we could be talking about Tzor itself, the island of Tzor. Another possibility we'll see is also going to be Cyprus, the island that's immediately outside. So if you, again, you remember your geography here, Cyprus is right out here, that big island that's right outside the area of Eretz Yisrael. We're going to talk about Sidon. Now, the reason is Sidon, just like Tarshish was dependent upon Tzor, it was the landing port of many of the goods that was exported from Tzor. Sidon, which was to the north, was dependent on Tzor also. It was a secondary kind of market. And if Tzor was destroyed, then Sidon would be destroyed as well. And then we go back again one more time talking about the island. That's the first piece, and that's going to be from Pasuk Aleph until the end of Pasuk Vav. From Zion until Yudalit is going to come another fascinating piece, and that's going to be, okay, we've described the destruction. The destruction came from God, and we need to understand that this was all part of God's plan himself. In that piece, we're also going to talk about the actions of mankind. The Dat Sofrim, Rabinowitz, suggests that we need to understand that when God acts in this world, typically the way he does is God makes his decision, and then human beings fulfill those decisions that were done. And so it's a 2-parter. Part A is this is all God's plan, but it may have come about because of the Babylonians or the Assyrians. We'll see that as well. And then the third part is a very unusual part, Pasuk Tetvav until the end. And it's going to say that this destruction of Tyre is a temporary destruction. It's only going to last for 70 years. And after 70 years, it will be rebuilt. But instead of being the city of magnificence, it's going to be a city of absolute commercialism in the worst possible way you could imagine it. And so it's going to be talking about prostitution. It's going to be talking not just human prostitution, but prostitution of values and morals. And it's going to be talking about all other kinds of things that after 70 years, when Tyre will be rebuilt, it isn't going to return to the same fashion. One suggestion is that if you remember, the 70 years is also significant in our history, because Galut Bavel for us was also 70 years long, and that it may be being brought as a contrast, that after 70 years, the Jews will return to Eretz Yisrael with Zerubbabel, with Ezra, with Nehemiah, and begin building the second Commonwealth, which will be a great time in Jewish history, versus the people of Tyre after 70 years, they're going to be making a living, but they're not going to return to what they had once been, to the glory of what had once been. And that's one explanation of it. So with all of that background, and there's a lot of it, also notice that this parak is very poetic. Now, very poetic, when we talk about Sefer Yeshayahu, is not just very poetic. It ultimately means it's very, very, very poetic, because Yeshayahu by himself is poetic to begin with. But there are certain structures of psukim that you can only understand when you look at it with a poetic as a poetic structure. So let's just get started. Masat Tzur. So Pasuk Aleph starts. This is the prophecy about Tzur. This is the prophecy of destruction. It's going to be, which is why we have the word Masa, which also is translated as a burden. Helilu oniot Tarshish. The boats of Tarshish, or the ships of Tarshish, should wail, or as the Radak says, they should mourn. Why? Because they're not going to have any place with the destruction of Tzor. They're not going to have a port in which to be able to unload and load their treasures. Ki shudad mi bayit mi bo. Because ultimately, an ason, a terrible, a shod, a terrible action has happened to them, and you have no place, you have no bayit, or as the Dat Mikra uses, he says bayit in this case, because we're talking about boats, he's talking about a port. Okay, and you have no place to go, mibo. Rashi says, and Rashi quotes more of a midrashic approach, that what is happening here is ki shudad mibayit means your inner part of your city, the city itself, where you would normally rest, where you would find a place after you have anchored in port to be able to stay. All of that has been destroyed inside. Me'eretz Kitim niglalamo. And from the land of Kitim, it has been revealed to them. Now, it is actually, nigla is talking about the invaders, those who have attacked this area. Now, the Kitim is generally referring to Rome. And so from one possibility is that you can see from Rome already, once you get into the Greek Isles, you can already hear, the people who are coming by boats, they'll already hear about destruction. However, the Abarbanel says, no, Kitim in this case is Cyprus. That what happens here when they get, and this is the Dat Mikra takes the same approach as well, that when the boats are nearing Cyprus, which is the last landmass before they would get to Tyre, again, Cyprus on the map is right here, okay? It's right here is Cyprus. So before they would get to Tyre, the last place that they're already are going, they're going to hear when they hit Cyprus that Tyre has been destroyed. And so start mourning the destruction. Domum Yoshvei. Be silent, those who live in this island. Now, what Dat Mikra says, this island here is the island of Cyprus. Right? We're just referred to Cyprus. So when they get to Kitim, the people of Cyprus, you should be silent. Rashi, okay, says that this is referring to a broader piece. Yoshvei is actually talking, we would say the Greek Isles themselves, that the Greek Isles, which used to profit by this back and forth of these boats going from Tarshish back to Tyre, that they should be silenced because they're not going to have what they need. Socher Sidon over Yamil Ulcha, because the Socher Sidon, the people who were going in Sidon, if you remember, is immediately north of Tyre, the merchants of Sidon who had gone with these boats and gone be able to transport everything, they're no longer. They're not going to be able to fill up your needs anymore. Now, according to Rashi, what this means is, why do we switch to Sidon from Tzor? Well, Tyre, when Tyre is destroyed, Sidon is also being destroyed. They're close enough. If Tyre falls, Sidon falls. So we're talking about these two coastal cities, one on top of the other. Sidon is to the north of Tzor. Uvemayim rabim zera shichor. And through great waters, the seeds, the grains of shichor are coming across. Now, normally, shichor, by the way, Rashi says, is the Nile. So from Egypt, they would normally come, the grains would come and they would be transported through Tyre. Tyre was the major port. They would come up the coast. Kitsiria or Tvuata, the harvest of the river was its yield, was its grain. In other words, this is poetic. Both of these terms are referring to the grain of Egypt that would normally be. Vatehi sechar goyim. And this is the way they used to have their commerce of the nations. The commerce of the nations would come from all over. In this case, we're giving an example of Egypt, from Egypt, which was the most fertile area around the Nile. They would bring the grains up, and it would be transported across the Mediterranean from the port city of Tzor. That was the great port city. And all of that is going to be destroyed. All of that will be without it. Boshit Sidon, the Navi says, be embarrassed, be shamed, the city of Sidon. Okay, why? Okay, ultimately, ki amar yam ma'oz hayam lemor, because the sea has said, Ma'oz, the fortress of the sea, has said. Now, this is part of the poetic structure. If you notice the word lemor, there are two phrases. Phrase one is ki amar yam, the sea has said. Ma'oz hayam is the second phrase, the fortress of the sea, and the lemor applies to both pieces. It's as if the pasuk had said, "Ki amar yam lemor, ma'oz hayam lemor," and that's how it will be done. Then what happens? Lo chalti v'lo yaladati v'lo gidalti bachurim romamti v'tulot. And it's crying out, and it says, Lo chalti. Chalti is referring to I never had labor pains, and I never gave birth, and I never raised sons, and I never reared daughters. Now, what's this talking about? The destruction is going to be so absolute that the people of Tzor are going to say, it's as if we never had families. Everyone has died. That's Rashi's approach. And the Targum Yonatan takes a little bit of a twist on it. The Targum Yonatan says that the people will say, we wish we never had the families because of the destruction that we've just suffered. But each of these pieces, it's absolute. Kasher Shemala Mitzrayim. As Mitzrayim heard, Yachilu Keshem Tzor. So too will it be as when Tzor is heard. Well, what does it mean? Now, Yachilu Keshem Tzor. They'll tremble like when what happens at Tzor is heard. The key to this pasuk is the word ka'asher. The ka'asher can have one of two explanations. Typically, ka'asher means when. And as a result, if you look in the Mitzudat David and others, okay, the way you would translate this pasuk is, when Mitzrayim hears what happened to Tyre, when Egypt hears what happens to Tyre, they're going to be frightened because they think they're next. That's when. So when this happens, this. However, Rashi takes a different approach. Rashi says ka'asher can also mean like. It's a dimayon. It's kemo. Okay, just as. And Rashi says, therefore, that what we're talking about, just as the nations were afraid when they heard the news of Egypt, so too will they tremble when they hear the news of Tzor. Now, what news of Egypt are they hearing? We're talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, the 10 plagues and the destructions that occurred there. So it all depends on how you translate the word ka'asher. One can be if it's when, so it's when they hear about, when Mitzrayim hears, okay, they're about what happened to Tyre, they're going to be afraid that it might happen to them next. Or just like when people heard about Mitzrayim, so too will they tremble when they hear about Tyre. Ivru Tarshisha, says the Navi, run away. Go to Tarshish. This is Rashi's approach. Escape to Tarshish. Helilu Yoshvei, and mourn, wail, the people who are in the islands of the sea. The Yoshvei comes back once. Why are they mourning? The Radak says, because their source of income, all of their produce, everything's been destroyed when you destroy Tyre. Now, the other possibility, the Radak says, no, it's not addressing it themselves to the people of Tzor, of Tyre, but rather it's addressing, the Navi is addressing himself to the merchants, to the sailors. It says, you've lost, Tyre is not available. So use Tarshish as your base from now on. Go away, go to the other side of the ocean, the other side of the sea, and start using Tarshish as your base, because everything has been destroyed on what you used to have. Pasuk Zayin. Now, Pasuk Zayin starts the second phase, and the second phase is where we say this all came from God. Hazot. There's anything? Skip the word. Hazot lachem alizam. this has happened to you, the city that it was joyous. Aliza is the name, joy is a joy. Mimei kedem kadmata yoviluha ragleha. From ancient times, whose origins, who from a place which were origins, the origins of the city were from ancient times. Yovilua ragla, its feet have transported it, merachok lagur, to far away. What's happening here? Rashi says, was this really the city that you took such pride and joy in? This city that now the inhabitants are dispersed, they're running away, and they're being moved far away. Interestingly, the Dat Sofrim says about this, and a comment that the Rabinowitz says about this, that this is a reaction that people had to the fear. They didn't even think of options; they just ran, and that's why it's saying that your feet took you in that way. Continuing, mi ya'atz Zot al Tzor Hama'atira. Now, whose plan was this, says the Navi, about the magnificent city of Tzor? Where did this come from? Asher Socharea Sarim, where its merchants were considered like royalty, Kin Anah Nichbedei Aretz, and also its merchants were among the honored people. Now, Kin Anah, normally, if you look at this word, you'd say it immediately comes from the word Canaan. You'd think it'd be Canaan. But if you remember Eshet Chayil, V'chagor Natna Liknani, okay, that the Eshet Chayil would take the belt and would give it to the Canaanite. It wasn't the Canaanite, would give it to the merchant. Okay, Canaan is also another term for a merchant. And so you have Socharea Sarim, the merchants, the sellers are princely, okay, they're officers. Kinaneh nichbedei aretz, they are very well respected. Now, the Dat Mikra points out what's so unusual about this. Well, there's two things. First of all, we're trying to describe the glory of Tzor. The glory of Tzor was commerce. The glory of Tzor was their, were their ships that would dock at Tzor and would provide sustenance for most of the Mediterranean. But what is also unusual here is, in most times in history, the merchants were not considered the highest of classes. They were merchants. Okay, you had your 5 and 10 store. You had your little store. You were okay. You were lower middle class, maybe middle class. You were never considered the princes and things of this nature. But when you talk about the city of Tzor, that was a commercial center. Those people had been elevated to this great level of importance. And so the Navi is saying, this is the city that was so magnificent, where your merchants were at the highest levels of society. They were, honored tremendously. Hashem tzvakot ya'atza. Very clearly, God was the one who planned all of this. Lechalel ge'on kol tzvi, to demean, to bring down. Chilul comes from the same word, like Chilul Hashem, to make profane, comes from the word, by the way, chol or halal, one of those two, emptiness, or either just the sand. It's like a nothing. God went ahead and he took the pride that they had of their tzvi is eretz tzvi. We have it's eretz chemda. It's the place of your desire. Okay, kol tzvi lahakel kol nichbadei aretz. God was the one who brought down, made light, all of those who were honored people in the land itself. Now, interestingly, the Radak says that this word lahakel actually comes up a little bit like with a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer is a logical construct that says, if this, then definitely this. Lahakel kol nichbedei aretz, the way the Radak takes it is the people, the former important people of the land, or in fact, he would suggest all of the world, that those people would say, oh my God, if this could happen there, then what can happen to us, to them? Now, remember, if we remember the geography again, if this could happen to the city that we thought was a safe fortress, then nothing would ever happen to it. And this was a city of such power and such wealth, and it was so utterly destroyed, what can happen to us as well? Okay, now the Dat Mikra though takes it more in a pshat approach. He said we were talking about nichbad, the people of great honor. Kal is the opposite of nichbad. They have been demeaned, they've been lowered, and that's the end of that. Ivri artzech kayaor. They will pass like a flowing river through the land. Now, who's going to be passing like a flowing river through the land? The people who are escaping Tyre. They're just going to be moving. Bat Tarshish ein mezach od. The daughter of Tarshish will have no more power. Now, mezach is a couple of possibilities. Tzion takes the classic explanation. Mezach, the mezach is a belt or like a weapons belt that would normally a person would gird. They tie onto themselves, and therefore it's the power. So in this case, Bat Tarshish ein mezach od has no more power. The Dat Mikra suggests that the mezach is actually the plank that people would go from the boats onto the shore. And in that sense, what it's saying is, Bat Tarshish, the daughter of Tarshish, there's no way of accessing anymore. Now, Rashi explains, Bat Tarshish is talking simply about the fact that Tarshish is, again, according to Rashi, the Mediterranean. Tzor is sitting on the edge of the Mediterranean, and so it's called the daughter of the sea, or the daughter of Tarshish, the daughter of the Mediterranean. That's why we're calling it Bat Tarshish. The right says no. He says actually you have to understand it Libat Tarshish, like there's a lamed built in here. And if there's a lamed built in here, then what ultimately we're saying is to the daughter of Tarshish. Not that we're describing Tzor, we're talking about the secondary piece of what happened. To them, there's no more power. Okay. Yado natalayam. God's hand has been brought out over the sea. Now, where do we find that concept? Yes. Kriyat Yamsuf. You have that kind of concept that with Kriyat Yamsuf, we're talking about God's power. Okay, Netet Yadchal. Okay, God has stretched his hand over the sea. Hirgiz mamlachot. And he has hirgiz, angered the nations. Now, what does it mean, hirgiz mamlachot? Well, anger is one possibility, but rogez is also a possibility of shaking as well, the fear. So according to Schwab, what's happening here is that when the rest of the nation saw what happened to Tzur, they were afraid. According to Mitzudat David, no, that this is specifically the city, Hirgiz Mamlachot, the city where all the nations would come. They saw how quickly it was destroyed. Tzival Canaan, Lashmid Ma'uzanah. And Hashem Tziva, God commanded to Canaan to destroy its source of strength. Now, what does it mean, Canaan? Well, Rashi takes the approach, and Rashi says, wait a second. Tzor and Sidon are actually offspring of the nation of Canaan. And so as a result, God has commanded about Canaan, it's as if he's saying, God has commanded the destruction of Tyre and Sidon will be occurring, okay? From all of its strength, it will be destroyed. It's as if it says, Tziva, not El Canaan, but Al Canaan, about Canaan. The Radak says, no. El Canaan, the Radak goes back to this. It's not talking about the nation of Canaan. It's talking about, Canaan was another term for merchants. And so Hashem commanded about the city of the merchants, Lashmid Ma'uzaneh, to destroy all of its power. This all came from God. Vayomer lo tosifi od lalos. And he said, no more will there be a chance to rejoice, to exult. Ham ushaka betulat batzion. Okay, the Sidon, yeah, I'm sorry. The oppressed one, the virgin daughter of Sidon. What does that mean? The Barbanel says, Ma'ashuka means here very simply, since Tsor has been destroyed. It leaves Sidon to the north without any commerce. It was all based there. The hub was all there in Tyre. And once the hub is in Tyre, anything that happens to Tyre impacts Sidon the same way. And the Abarbanel goes even further, that why is it called Bitulat Bat Sidon? Because until then, this city had never been captured before. It was a city that had never been taken siege, never had anything happen to it bad. And now all of a sudden, everything happens. And then it continues, Kitim Kumi Avori. In this case, the Romans, according to the Abarbanel, come, okay? They will go and they will pass. Gam Sham Lo Yanuach Lach. You're going to go there, you exiles of these cities, you're going to go there, but you're never going to have any rest. You're always going to be pursued. Hen Eretz Kastim Zaha'am Lohaya. It's as if the Eretz Kistim, this nation, had never existed. Now, the Dat Sofrim explains it as follows, that these people of Tyre and of Sidon were never considered really as a nation of themselves. They were always a people that were a small, unimportant people. And in this case, when we're talking about Eretz Kasdim, this is the land of Bavel. Eretz Kasdim is, remember, Avram Avinu came from Ur Kasdim, the land of Bavel, the land of Babylonia. It was something insignificant. And yet, what did they do? Ashur Yasada Litziyim. Ashur goes ahead, the Assyrians come, and they make it a place of wild people. In other words, it was like for Bavel, the Assyrians are accused by the Navi here of having put all of these outcasts, these horrific people, and resettled them into Bavel. I want to get rid of people, bad people, I put them in Bavel. Okay? And yes, Heikimu, and then Heikimu Vachunav, they put up these big towers, which when you're going to attack another, when you're laying siege, you put these towers so you can attack the wall. Oruru Armanotah, they uprooted, they destroyed the palaces, Sama Lamapela, and they went ahead and they made it into an area of utter destruction. Now, this is true. It sounds a little bit like the news. According to the Dat Sofrim, what's happening here is these wild animals of people just go in and wreak absolute destruction. There's no sense in what they're doing. They're just destroying. According to the Dat Mikra, and that's the Babylonians, according to the Dat Mikra, the subject here is no. The subject here is the Assyrians, not the Babylonians. And ultimately what we're saying is the Assyrians, when they come, remember they came and they were going to destroy Bavel. And they were going to make Bavel as if it had never existed. And they created ultimate destruction against Bavel. Okay. What we have here now is the two pieces. Part number one is the destruction and its consequence. We talk about the destruction of the commerce and all of the other Mediterranean nations suffering from this as well. Part number two, we said this came from God, even though whether it's Ashur or Bavel who was involved in the destruction, they were instruments of the divine. And now comes part number three, which is a strange piece, because Vahaya Bayomahu. Now, I'm sorry, skip one pasuk. Helilu oniyot Tarshish ki shudar ma'uschem. He says this pasuk reminds us back of the first pasuk of the parak. Just wail. There we said Helilu oniyot Tarshish ki shudad mibayit mibo, and here is Helilu oniyot Tarshish ki shudad ma'uschem. Okay, wail out because your strength has been destroyed. Okay, it's bookends to the parak. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I have a question. All the other nations, I believe that Yeshayahu was giving these Masaot to, were enemies of Israel. Where do you see Tsor and Sidon as oppressors? That's number one. We don't. So then what's the theocratic or theological explanation for Hashem Ya'atzadzeh, What is it? I mean, it's not random. There's a real purpose in it. Right. What is that?
So I'll go even a step further. And the step further is, why is it the last of all the Masa'ot? I would have thought that we would have ended the Masa'ot with the destruction of the Jews, which we had talked about. Why do we come back now to one of the nations and talk about one of the nations? And it's one of the big questions about this parak itself. One possible explanation, which to me feels more midrashic than anything else, is that there was basically an embargo placed by the people of Tzor on helping the people of Yehuda. That while there was a time, remember, Hiram helped out Shlomo when he was building, and later on, when Ezra and Nehemiah come, we again find supplies coming from there. There was a period of time where they were so corrupt and so into their own profit centers that were not helping us as well, and that might be part of the reason. I actually, what spoke to me more is what I mentioned in the beginning, and we'll see here again in this last section, that this is coming more as a contrast. Yeshayahu is bringing this piece in as a contrast. We ended with the destruction of the Jewish people with hope at the end, and now we're talking about another nation that's being destroyed, and the hope at the end is not the same kind of hope. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, what I'm doing for the Jews, which I've talked about before, is something extraordinary, because another nation who will be destroyed, who will find a point of reconstruction after 70 years, is not going to be able to have happen to them like happened to the Jews itself. And so that's to me how this parak fits in much better than just saying it's a postscript almost, but it's really a piece right inside.
Is there any relationship to the fact that, like you said, that Hiram Melech Tzor sent lumber, and Shlomo HaMelech relied on him so much? He was a good friend of David HaMelech. Is there any relationship to that? And also to Tzidon, Melech Achav took Yisrael from Tzidon. She was Bas Melech Tzidon.
Yeah, so first of all, there were always relationships. And if you remember, there was some criticism when Shlomo HaMelech relied so heavily on Hiram, including the number of workers he brought in, foreign workers he brought in to help out with the Beit HaMikdash. There was some criticism. I think it's not so much that piece, but the period in between, that between when Hiram, there were these alliances. There was Tzidon and Tzor were people who the Jews had relationships with. They never came back to help out the Jews. They didn't fulfill their alliances, and that you'll find within the Meforshim as well. Part of the reason for their punishment.
Okay, thank you.
Third part of the parak is the one that is complicated, and in fact, in the non-religious scholarship, in other words, the people who don't accept that Yeshayahu was Yeshayahu, but rather said it's a compilation of different pieces, and some very smart people wrote it, but not Yeshayahu. They suggest this was written much later, because it just doesn't seem to fit the rest of it. But as we were just talking about, it does fit in. Okay, V'haya bayomahu, and it will be on that day. V'nishkachat Tzor 70 shana. Tzor is going to be forgotten for 70 years. Kimei melech echad, like the span of one king. Now, Rashi says the span of one king was the span of David HaMelech. David HaMelech lived 70 years, so it's like the span of 1 year, one king. That's already where you start getting a little complicated. Well, why pick on David HaMelech? Why not? The Radak says, no, this is talking about the average life we talk about of a person is 70 years. Tanakh refers to this many times. However, why would it be Melech if we're talking about a person? And so the answer to that would be, well, we're talking about a royal regal city. And so when you're talking about a royal regal city, you're saying like a person, well, the person is the king himself. Not an overly satisfying answer to that. And it remains one of those questions why we say, Kimei melech echad, but it's a 70-year span. Mikein 70 shana yeh Tzor kishirat hazonan. And then after 70 years, Tzor will be like the harlot who is singing. Now, strange image, okay? The Dat Mikra says, if you want to know what the harlot is singing, look at the next pasuk. We'll get to there. But the Radak says that when these women would be out of circulation for a period of time, they had to drum up business again. And that was the way they would advertise. They would start singing. And so we're not talking about it. We're really talking the most demeaning, degrading terms about the city of Tyre. Okay, so you're going to be no different than a group of prostitutes trying to drum up new business. You're going to be singing that song. In terms of Kichichi Norb, this is how the singing is going to be. Take your harp, so be ear, start walking around town. Zonanish Gachao, forgotten harlot. Hey TV Nagen Harbi Shir. Play well and sing a lot. Leman Tizacheri, so that you will be remembered. In all of this is in contrast to what we had said back in Pasuk Chet, that Sor Hama'atira, the magnificent Sor, magnificent city of Tyre, look how it has become. Look what you need to do. The people will even think about you. Vayamiket Shivim Shana, and it will be at the end of those 70 years, Yifkod Hashem et Sor. Okay, God will remember Tzor once again, Vishava let Nana, and it will return to its profits. Now, and Nana is its profits from prostitution. Okay, Eten Zona is profits that are made from prostitution. Now, why is it using this again? If you want to talk about commerce in the most base, degrading manner, they're prostituting themselves. We would say in English, you're going to get that kind of profit. And they are going to prostitute all of the nations of the world on the face of the earth, as demeaning as possible that we can have. This place that was the international center of commerce, that was held in high esteem, now who's coming to them? The people are going to be there, the thieves, the robbers, the pirates, all the worst, the lowest form of human interaction. That's going to be found in Tyre. Vayam, and it will be Sachra ve'etnana kodesh l'Hashem. Now we take a really quick left turn, and it will be that all of the business, all of the commerce, and all of the profits of its prostitution will be kodesh l'Hashem, will be sanctified. Now, how's this happening? The Radak says that this pasuk is not talking after 70 years. This pasuk is talking in the times of the Mashiach. That Tzor, all of the bad things that were there ultimately is going to be for good. Now, the Radak gives a second explanation, which is even easier to understand. Because if you remember the context of where all of this is happening, Tzor in the second Beit HaMikdash also brought building materials to Yerushalayim. And so what the Navi could be saying, and this is the Radak's second explanation, we're not talking about the time of Mashiach, but it says all of these terrible things that are come out of Tzor, at the end of the day, Tzor is going to help us. And Tzor's materials are going to be helping us rebuild. Lo ya'atzer v'lo yechasen. And it's not going to be putting its materials in storehouses. Okay, Kili yoshvim lifnei Hashem yesachra, but rather it's going to be for the people who are before God, where you're going to have its commerce. Lechol sav'a u'lemechaseh atik, and it will be used for sustaining people. Okay, it will be, and also that it's going to be for now, atik in this case, I almost probably better English word. I don't know how he translates it in Sensino or Art Scroll, but I would say almost like vintage clothing. That it'll elegant clothing. Okay, elegant clothing that it's going to be. In other words, what we're saying is as follows in this last piece. It has two parts, this last piece. Tzor is never going to go back to its former glory. Tzor will be rebuilt. It will never be its former glory, but Tzor will serve a purpose in the future. And that purpose it will serve is from Tzor will come the opportunity for us to help rebuild the second Beit HaMikdash. And based on that, there is a sense of our hope in this prophecy. It's not really a hope for Tzor. They're going to be a miserable place. But out of this miserable place, there'll come something good. And from that, we end the Masa'ot, we end these 10 prakim of these horrific descriptions of what's going to happen in the times of the future times. And we're going to have don't worry about it, because we will have more destruction still coming up. Yeshayahu is not going to disappoint us. But next week we'll do Perek Chaf Daled. And for those who are traveling to Washington on Tuesday, Kol HaKavod, you should have a safe trip. For those who are not traveling to Washington on Tuesday, men, we can use extra people at the minyan, the second minyan on Tuesday, because it'll be a little bit short because so many people are going. Very proud of the fact that we have, I think, over 60 members who are traveling, and we should do well, and we should hear good news. And from Tzor, I don't need to hear any news anymore. That's enough of that. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.